Phantasm. In 1979, writer-director Don Coscarelli created one of the most surreal and unsettling independent horror films ever made. Phantasm follows a young boy named Mike, who discovers that the local mortician, known only as the Tall Man, is stealing corpses and transforming them into zombie dwarves to be used as slave labor on another planet. The film's most iconic element is the flying silver sphere that drills into victims' heads, a practical effect that became legendary in horror circles, despite the film's tiny budget of $300,000. What makes Phantasm truly remarkable is how it operates on dream logic rather than traditional narrative structure. Scenes flow into each other with the unsettling disconnect of a nightmare, where cause and effect don't always connect in ways that make rational sense. Coscarelli shot the film over the course of more than a year with a tiny crew, using creative camera work and practical effects to create images that burned themselves into viewers' minds. The Tall Man, played by Angus Scrimm, became an instant horror icon with his towering presence and the chilling line, "Boy." The film's influence extends far beyond its modest box office success. It spawned 4 sequels, 5 films total, over nearly 4 decades, with Coscarelli and Scrimm returning for each installment to continue Mike's bizarre odyssey. More importantly, Phantasm proved that horror didn't need massive budgets or studio backing to create genuinely original and disturbing imagery. Its combination of science fiction elements, body horror, and dreamlike atmosphere created a template that countless filmmakers would attempt to replicate, though few would capture the same lightning in a bottle that made the original so uniquely unsettling. The Wicker Man. The original 1973 The Wicker Man stands as the definitive example of folk horror, a subgenre it helped popularize and perfect. Directed by Robin Hardy and starring Edward Woodward as a devoutly Christian police sergeant investigating a missing child on a remote Scottish island, the film builds dread through the slow revelation that the island's inhabitants practice ancient pagan rituals. Christopher Lee, who played Lord Summerisle, considered it his finest performance, and he took the role for free because he believed so strongly in the material. The film's production history is almost as tragic as its story. Studio executives hated the movie and cut it down from its original runtime, with some footage rumored, but never confirmed, to have been lost or destroyed during storage. The version most people have seen is a reconstruction that attempts to restore Hardy's vision, but the complete original cut remains unrecovered. Despite this mishandling, The Wicker Man found its audience through repertory screenings and home video, where its slow burn approach and shocking finale could be properly appreciated. What makes the film so effective is its complete inversion of horror expectations. The island of Summerisle is bright and cheerful, filled with folk music and communal celebrations. There's no obvious monster or slasher lurking in shadows. Instead, the horror comes from the gradual realization that Sergeant Howe is completely outmatched by an entire society whose values are fundamentally incompatible with his own. The final image of Howe burning alive inside the massive Wicker Man while the islanders sing around him remains one of the most haunting endings in horror cinema. The film's influence can be seen in everything from Midsommar to The Ritual, proving that sometimes the scariest monsters are just people who believe differently than you do. Society. Brian Yuzna's 1989 directorial debut Society takes the concept of class warfare and transforms it into grotesque body horror that must be seen to be believed. The film follows Bill Whitney, a wealthy teenager in Beverly Hills who begins to suspect that his family and their social circle are hiding something monstrous. His suspicions prove correct when he discovers that the upper class are literally a different species that feeds on those beneath them in the social hierarchy through a process called shunting, where their bodies merge together in writhing masses to absorb the essence of their victims. The film's climax, which Yuzna spent months developing with special effects artist screaming Mad George, features some of the most disturbing practical effects ever committed to film. Bodies twist and flow into each other like clay, faces emerge from torsos, limbs stretch and contort in ways that defy anatomy. The shunting sequence remains shocking even by modern standards, a fever dream of flesh that perfectly visualizes the metaphor of the rich literally consuming the poor. The effects work required innovative techniques, including specially designed foam latex appliances and animatronics that could simulate flesh melting and reforming. What elevates Society beyond mere gross-out horror is its satirical edge. Yuzna uses the extreme body horror as a blunt instrument to attack the Reagan-era excess and class stratification of 1980s America. The wealthy characters speak in coded language about their breeding and feeding, treating their parasitic relationship with the working class as simply the natural order of things. The film was largely ignored during its initial release, possibly because audiences weren't ready for such an on-the-nose critique wrapped in such aggressively disturbing imagery. Decades later, as wealth inequality has only worsened, Society feels more relevant and uncomfortable than ever. Dead and Buried. Dead and Buried, released in 1981, creates an atmosphere of mounting paranoia in the small coastal town of Potter's Bluff. When visitors start arriving in town, only to be murdered by seemingly ordinary citizens, Sheriff Dan Gillis begins investigating a series of impossible occurrences. The victims keep reappearing around town, alive, but subtly different, as if they never died at all. The film was directed by Gary Sherman and written by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, the team behind Alien, bringing that same talent for sustained dread to a very different kind of story. The film's secret weapon is actor Jack Albertson as the town mortician William G. Dobbs. Albertson, who had won an Oscar for The Subject Was Roses and was beloved for his role in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, brings a grandfatherly warmth to Dobbs that makes his true nature all the more disturbing when revealed. His workshop scenes, where he carefully restores and reanimates the dead, are filled with a craftsman's pride that borders on the obscene. The makeup effects, created by Stan Winston early in his legendary career, are remarkably detailed for the era, particularly during a scene involving facial reconstruction that remains difficult to watch. The film's twist ending recontextualizes everything that came before, revealing a conspiracy that extends to the very foundation of Potter's Bluff's identity. Without spoiling specifics, the revelation transforms the sheriff's investigation into something far more personal and horrifying than a simple murder mystery. Dead and Buried never found a large audience during its theatrical run, possibly because its slow-burn approach and ambiguous morality didn't fit neatly into the slasher-dominated early 1980s horror landscape. Modern viewers who appreciate films like The Wicker Man and Let's Scare Jessica to Death will find much to admire in its patient building of dread and its refusal to provide easy answers about the nature of identity and death. Quick note, if you're enjoying what you're watching so far, I create videos like this all the time. A subscription would really mean a lot. Possession. Andrzej Żuławski's 1981 Possession is less a horror film than a full-scale assault on the senses that happens to involve a tentacled creature living in an abandoned apartment. Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill star as a married couple going through a divorce in Cold War-era West Berlin, but their separation takes increasingly bizarre and violent turns as Anna's behavior becomes more erratic, and Mark's desperate attempts to understand what's happening to his wife lead him down a rabbit hole of sexual jealousy, political paranoia, and literal body horror. The film is most famous for Adjani's performance in the subway miscarriage scene, a several-minute sequence of physical and emotional intensity that feels more like a possession itself than acting. Adjani throws herself against walls, contorts her body in impossible positions, and ultimately suffers what appears to be a miscarriage of something decidedly inhuman, all while passengers and onlookers treat the spectacle with bureaucratic indifference. The scene was shot early one morning in only 2 takes, but its intensity left Adjani physically and emotionally exhausted. Her commitment earned her the Best Actress award at Cannes, though the film itself was widely banned and heavily cut in multiple countries for its graphic violence and sexual content. Possession works as a metaphor for divorce, mental illness, Cold War anxiety, and religious crisis all at once, refusing to settle on a single interpretation. Żuławski, who wrote the script while going through his own painful divorce, channels raw emotional anguish into surreal horror that feels genuinely dangerous and unpredictable. The creature that Anna keeps hidden represents different things, depending on how you approach the film: a manifestation of her desire, a replacement for her husband, or perhaps the only honest thing in a world built on lies and performance. The film's reputation has only grown since its release, with contemporary filmmakers citing it as a major influence on their own explorations of relationship horror and psychological breakdown. The Beyond. Italian horror maestro Lucio Fulci's 1981 The Beyond opens with a prologue set in 1927 Louisiana, where a lynch mob attacks a painter staying at the Seven Doors Hotel, crucifying him in the basement and pouring quicklime over his body. Decades later, a young woman inherits the hotel and begins renovations, unknowingly breaking the seals that have kept one of the 7 gates to hell closed. What follows is a dreamlike descent into supernatural chaos, where the normal rules of cause and effect cease to apply. Fulci's approach to horror emphasizes atmosphere and visceral impact over narrative coherence. Characters wander through scenes that feel disconnected from each other, connected more by mood and visual motifs than by plot logic. The film features some of the most infamous gore sequences in horror history, including a scene where spiders consume a man's face in extreme close-up, and another where acid slowly dissolves a woman's features. These moments are shot with lingering attention that transforms them from mere shock value into something approaching the sublime. Beauty and horror merge so completely that they become indistinguishable. The Beyond was part of Fulci's Gates of Hell trilogy, along with City of the Living Dead and The House by the Cemetery, though the films share only thematic connections rather than direct narrative links. The trilogy represents Fulci at his most uncompromising, creating films that operate on nightmare logic where geography shifts, time becomes fluid, and death offers no escape from suffering. The nihilistic ending, which suggests that hell is not a place, but a state of existence that can spread like a virus, remains one of the bleakest conclusions in horror cinema. The film found new life in the late 1990s when Quentin Tarantino's Rolling Thunder Pictures, working with Grindhouse Releasing and Cowboy Booking International, brought a restored version back to theaters, introducing Fulci's singular vision to a new generation of horror fans willing to surrender to its hallucinatory power. Basket Case. Frank Henenlotter's 1982 Basket Case was shot on a shoestring budget of $35,000 on the streets of New York City, and every dollar of that poverty shows on screen in ways that only enhance its grimy, transgressive charm. The film follows Dwayne Bradley, a young man who arrives in Manhattan carrying a wicker basket containing his hideously deformed conjoined twin Belial, who was surgically separated from Dwayne's side against both their wills. The brothers have come to the city seeking revenge on the doctors who performed the separation, with Belial doing the actual killing while Dwayne struggles with guilt and his desire for a normal life. Belial himself was created using a combination of puppet work and stop-motion animation, resulting in a creature that looks simultaneously fake and somehow more disturbing because of that artificiality. The creature's design, with its misshapen head, tiny arms, and perpetually screaming mouth, shouldn't work at all by conventional standards. Yet Henenlotter's commitment to treating Belial as a fully realized character rather than just a monster gives the film an emotional core that elevates it above typical exploitation fare. The scenes where Dwayne communicates telepathically with his brother, trying to calm his murderous rages or negotiate their increasingly incompatible desires, carry genuine pathos. The film became a midnight movie sensation, playing for months at theaters like the Waverly in New York, where audiences embraced its combination of splatter horror, dark comedy, and surprising emotional honesty about disability and bodily autonomy. Henenlotter shot most of the film guerrilla style, stealing shots on actual New York streets and inside a seedy Times Square hotel used as a stand-in for the fictional Hotel Broslin, a genuine flophouse that lent the film an authenticity no studio set could replicate. The success of Basket Case allowed Henenlotter to continue making uncompromising horror films throughout the 1980s, though none quite captured the same magic as his debut's perfect storm of ambition, limitations, and pure audacity. The Burning. While Friday the 13th gets most of the credit for establishing the summer camp slasher template, The Burning, released just 1 year later in 1981, deserves recognition for perfecting many of the subgenre's elements. The film was the first production from Miramax Films, founded by Harvey and Bob Weinstein, and featured special effects by Tom Savini, fresh off his work on the original Friday the 13th. The story follows Cropsey, a camp caretaker who was burned alive in a prank gone wrong and returns 5 years later to exact revenge on a new generation of campers using a pair of modified garden shears as his weapon of choice. Savini's effects work elevates The Burning above most of its slasher contemporaries. The Raft Massacre sequence, where Cropsey attacks a group of campers in rapid succession, features some of the most convincing gore effects of the era, with fingers being severed, throats being cut, and bodies being punctured in ways that look genuinely painful rather than cartoonish. Savini had turned down the opportunity to work on Friday the 13th Part 2, specifically to do The Burning, and his craftsmanship shows in every carefully constructed wound. The film's makeup effects were so convincing that the MPAA demanded cuts before granting an R rating, though uncut versions have since been restored. The film also features early appearances by several actors who would go on to significant careers, including Jason Alexander in his film debut, Fisher Stevens, and Holly Hunter in a brief role. The cast brings more naturalism to their performances than typical slasher fodder, making the kills feel more impactful because the characters register as actual teenagers rather than archetypes waiting to die. The Burning never achieved the franchise success of Friday the 13th or A Nightmare on Elm Street, but it has maintained a devoted following among slasher enthusiasts who appreciate its superior craftsmanship and its willingness to show the consequences of violence rather than just using it for cheap thrills. Near Dark. Catherine Bigelow's 1987 Near Dark reimagines vampire mythology through the lens of the American West, creating something that feels more like an outlaw biker movie than traditional gothic horror. The film follows Caleb, a farm boy who falls for May, a drifter who turns out to be part of a nomadic vampire clan traveling the Southwest in a stolen RV. After May turns Caleb to save his life, he must choose between his humanity and his growing addiction to blood, while the clan's leader, Jesse, tests whether he has what it takes to survive their violent lifestyle. The film's greatest strength is its cast, particularly the quartet of veteran character actors who make up the vampire clan. Lance Henriksen plays Jesse with world-weary authority, a Confederate soldier turned eternal predator who has seen empires rise and fall. Bill Paxton delivers a career-best performance as Severin, a psychotic cowboy vampire who treats killing like a religious experience, complete with whoops and hollers. Jeanette Goldstein plays Diamondback with feral intensity, while Joshua John Miller brings heartbreaking vulnerability to Homer, a vampire forever trapped in the body of a child. The fact that Henriksen, Paxton, and Goldstein had all appeared in Aliens the previous year gives their scenes together an easy chemistry that makes their family dynamic feel lived in and real. Bigelow shoots the film like a western, all wide-open spaces and harsh sunlight that becomes a constant threat to her vampire characters. The bar massacre sequence, where the clan toys with and eventually slaughters everyone in a roadside tavern, plays like a sadistic hoedown, with Severin leading the carnage while country music plays on the jukebox. Notably, none of the vampires in the film have fangs or superhuman powers beyond strength and healing. They cut their victims and drink from the wounds like animals, an approach that makes the vampirism feel more like a disease or addiction than a supernatural curse. Near Dark was a box office failure upon release, but it has since been recognized as one of the most original vampire films ever made, proving that sometimes the best way to honor a genre is to completely tear it down and rebuild it from scratch. If you found this valuable, consider subscribing so you catch every new video I upload. Thanks for watching.